I grew up believing my uncle was a hero, a true family legend. But after my grandmother died, I found letters and secrets that exposed him as a fraud, a thief, and a liar. He stole our inheritance, lied about his past, and manipulated everyone who loved him. I finally stood up, exposed the truth, and watched his empire collapse. You won't believe what I'm about to tell you. For most of my life, my family worshipped one man. We thought he was a hero, a legend, the kind of man you whisper about at the dinner table, the one whose shadow you never escape. But let me tell you something, what I discovered about him tore my family apart. It wasn't just a scandal. It was betrayal. And it changed how I saw my parents, my siblings, and even myself. I grew up in a small Midwestern town. Ordinary people, ordinary lives. But there was one name everyone knew, Uncle Richard. He was my father's older brother, the golden child, the war hero, the successful businessman. At every family reunion, his name came up. Richard built his company from nothing. Richard saved his platoon in Vietnam. Richard never forgot where he came from. As a kid, I would sit there listening wide-eyed, while my dad polished the myth. Your uncle is a legend, he'd say, slapping the table proudly. One day, you'll understand. We weren't rich. My dad worked 2 jobs, my mom pinched pennies, and Christmas gifts were modest. But whenever Richard visited, always in a shiny car, always in an expensive suit, it felt like royalty had arrived. He'd hand out gifts like candy, smile that charming smile, and then disappear back to his big house in Chicago. I thought, one day, I want to be like him. But behind that polished image, behind the family pride, there was something darker. And I had no idea how deep it went. It all started when my grandmother passed away. She was the heart of our family, the kind of woman who baked pies even when her hands shook with arthritis. She left behind her house, some savings, and most importantly, her will. That's when the cracks started showing. I was about 28 at the time, married, with a newborn. My siblings and cousins gathered in the lawyer's office. I still remember the smell of that place, dust and leather, and the nervous shifting of people waiting to hear their names. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. Your grandmother wanted her estate divided equally among her children. Seemed simple enough. But then came the shock. However, the lawyer continued, there is an amendment. A significant portion of her assets, including the family home, are to go to Richard. The room went silent. My dad's face turned red. My aunt gasped. And Richard? He just sat there, calm, smug almost, like he had been expecting it. My dad whispered, this can't be right. Mom promised us fairness. But Richard leaned back in his chair and said, it's all legal. Mom wanted me to have it. After all, I've always been the one who looked after her. That wasn't true. My grandmother lived in town, and it was my dad and my aunt who visited weekly, brought groceries, fixed the leaky roof. Richard rarely showed up, except at Christmas. Yet here he was, taking the lion's share. I felt sick. How could Grandma do this? I thought. And that's when things started unraveling. See, Richard wasn't just a businessman. He was a manipulator. He had convinced my grandmother that he was the only child capable of protecting her legacy. He played the hero card, the legend card, until even she believed it. But the truth? He wasn't protecting anything. He was stealing. A few weeks later, my dad found old letters in Grandma's desk. Letters where Richard pressured her into changing the will. He told her my dad was irresponsible, my aunt untrustworthy, and the rest of us too young to matter. He even hinted that without him, the family name would be forgotten. When my dad showed us those letters, I couldn't believe it. This man, the so-called legend, had poisoned our grandmother's mind against her own children. The more we dug, the worse it got. Richard hadn't built his company from nothing. He had used Grandma's savings to start it. He hadn't saved his platoon. He had been dishonorably discharged, something he'd hidden for decades. Everything we admired him for was a lie. And yet, half the family still defended him. He's successful, they said. He deserves it. Others whispered, don't stir up trouble. It's done. But I couldn't let it go. Neither could my dad. One night, I sat with him on the porch. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. Son, he said, I can't fight him. He's too powerful. But maybe you can. You're the one who sees through him now. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about truth. It was about tearing down the false image of a man who had controlled us all with lies. And so I decided to confront Richard. The day I walked into his mansion, I felt like David standing before Goliath. He greeted me with that fake smile, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and said, "So, the little nephew wants answers?" I looked him in the eye and said, "You're no legend. You're a fraud." His smile faded. And that's where the Betrayal story begins. When I told Richard he was no legend, just a fraud, the silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. He set down his whiskey glass, leaned back in his leather chair, and gave me this cold little laugh. "You've been listening to your father, haven't you?" he sneered. "He's always been jealous. Always wanted what I had. And now he's poisoned you too." I shook my head. My hands were trembling, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "Dad never said a word against you until now. But we found the letters, Richard. We know what you did. You manipulated Grandma into changing the will. You made her believe lies about her own children." For the first time, his mask cracked. Just for a second. A flicker of anger, sharp and real. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and whispered, "Do you really think anyone's going to believe you? Look around. Who has the money? Who has the power? Who has the house?" My stomach turned, but I pressed on. Truth matters more than money. He laughed again, but there was no charm left in it. "Truth is what people choose to believe. And everyone believes I'm a legend." That line stuck with me. Truth is what people choose to believe. I left that night shaken, but more determined than ever. My dad and I started digging. We went through boxes of old papers, military records, even newspaper clippings. And the more we uncovered, the more the legend unraveled. The honorable discharge he bragged about? A lie. He'd been court-martialed for insubordination and drinking on duty. The business he'd built with his own hands. He had taken out loans in Grandma's name without her full knowledge, and when she questioned him, he guilt her by saying, "Don't you want to see me succeed? Don't you want our family name to mean something?" And the biggest twist? His wealth wasn't what it seemed. Sure, he had the house, the car, the tailored suits. But behind the curtain, he was drowning in debt. He had mortgaged the mansion 3 times. His company was barely afloat. Everything he had was smoke and mirrors. When I told Dad, he sat there stunned. He's not just a liar. He's desperate. That's why he fought so hard for the inheritance. We knew we had the truth. But truth alone doesn't win battles. We needed proof that others would believe. So we reached out to family, my cousins, my aunt, even Mom. At first, no one wanted to hear it. "Richard always helped us," they said. "He gave me a job. He paid for my surgery. He sent my kid to college." That was the trick. He'd thrown money around just enough to keep everyone loyal, blind to where it came from. One cousin, though, Emily, finally listened. She was younger than me, sharp, and she hated how Richard always looked down on her. When we showed her the letters and the discharge papers, she gasped. "He's been lying all this time?" "Yes," I said. "And if we don't stop him, he'll take everything Grandma wanted us to share." That's when Emily joined us. And she had an idea. If we want the family to see the truth, we need to hit him where it hurts, his image. Expose him at the next reunion. The annual reunion was sacred. Every July, dozens of relatives gathered at the old park, with barbecue, laughter, and of course endless stories about Uncle Richard, the legend. If there was ever a stage to bring him down, that was it. I was nervous. My wife told me, "Are you sure? What if it backfires? What if they all turn against you?" But I couldn't back down. I remembered my grandmother's voice, frail but kind, telling me once, "Always be honest, even when it's hard." I had to believe she'd want the truth to come out. The day of the reunion came. The air was thick with summer heat, kids running with sparklers, tables lined with food. And right on cue, Richard arrived in his gleaming car, stepping out in his perfect suit, smiling like a king among peasants. People clapped, hugged him, asked about his business. He soaked it all in. Then it was time for speeches. There was always a moment when someone raised a glass to honor Grandma and Grandpa. This year, Richard stood up first. "I just want to say," he began, "that everything I've done for this family. To keep our name alive. To make sure we are remembered with pride." Cheers. Applause. My blood boiled. And then, my dad nudged me. "Now." I stood up, heart pounding in my chest. "Actually, there's something everyone needs to know." The crowd went quiet. All eyes on me. Richard's smile faltered. I pulled out a folder, the letters, the military records, copies of the mortgage statements. My voice shook, but I kept going. "We've all believed in this legend of Uncle Richard. But the truth is, it's a lie. He didn't build his company alone. He used Grandma's savings. He wasn't discharged honorably, he was kicked out. He manipulated Grandma into changing her will, so he could take more than his share. And everything he shows us, this car, this suit, this house, it's all built on debt." Gasps. Murmurs. My aunt's face went pale. My cousins exchanged looks. Richard stood frozen, his eyes burning into me. Then he slammed his glass down so hard it shattered. "Lies," he roared. "Jealous lies from a bitter family who never achieved anything." But Emily spoke up. She pulled out her phone and showed screenshots of emails she'd gotten from old employees of his company, emails that confirmed shady practices and unpaid debts. "It's not lies," she said, her voice steady. "It's the truth." The crowd erupted. Some shouted at Richard. Some turned away in disgust. Others just stared in disbelief, their hero collapsing before their eyes. My dad stood beside me, tears in his eyes, but proud. For the first time in years, he wasn't in Richard's shadow. Richard tried to fight back. He grabbed the folder, waving it around, yelling, "You don't understand. I did what I had to do. I'm the reason this family has any respect." But no one was listening anymore. The spell was broken. That night, for the first time in decades, Richard left a reunion not as a legend, but as a man exposed. And I thought that was the end. But it wasn't. Because what happens when a man who's built his entire life on lies is finally cornered? He fights back. And Richard wasn't done with us yet. After the reunion, I thought we had won. For the first time, the truth about Richard was out in the open. People had gasped, whispered, even shouted at him. The legend had been stripped bare. I remember driving home that night with my dad, both of us silent, the warm summer air blowing through the open windows. Finally, Dad broke the silence. "You did good, son. Your grandmother would be proud." Those words meant everything to me. 4 years, I'd lived in Richard's shadow too. Now I felt lighter, like maybe our family could finally move forward. But legends don't die quietly. And Richard wasn't about to let his empire of lies collapse without a fight. It started small. Phone calls. My cousin Mark, who had been one of his biggest defenders, suddenly stopped answering me. My aunt, who had cried when she saw the proof, suddenly posted on Facebook about family unity and not airing dirty laundry. Then my dad's boss pulled him aside at work and said, "I heard some things about you, about jealousy, about trying to ruin your brother." My dad almost lost his job over it. That's when we realized Richard was poisoning the waters. He was calling family, friends, even neighbors, spinning a new story. According to him, we were the manipulators. We were trying to steal from him. We were envious nobodies trying to destroy the one successful man in the family. "He's turning it all back on us," I told Emily over the phone, pacing in my kitchen. "We exposed him, but he's rebuilding his image." Emily sighed. "That's what he's always done. He twists the truth until people forget what really happened." But then came the real blow. A letter from a lawyer. Richard was suing us for defamation and emotional distress. He wanted damages, thousands of dollars. My dad nearly collapsed when he read it. "I can't fight this. We don't have the money. He'll bury us in court." And honestly, I was terrified. Lawsuits weren't just words. They meant lawyers, bills, years of fighting. Exactly what Richard wanted. That night, I sat with my wife at the kitchen table, staring at the letter. She touched my hand and said, "He's trying to scare you. If you back down now, he wins. But if you stand your ground, maybe others will see the truth. I barely slept. I kept replaying his words at the reunion. Truth is what people choose to believe. Maybe he was right. Maybe people didn't care about the proof. Maybe they only cared about the story that made them feel safe, that their family had a hero, not a fraud. But the next day, something unexpected happened. Emily called. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. One of his old business partners reached out to me. He saw the reunion video on Facebook. He says he has documents, real evidence of fraud. Not just family lies. Legal fraud. My heart jumped. "Are you serious?" "Yes." He said Richard cheated him out of thousands, and he's been waiting for years to get back at him. We met the man a week later, in a quiet diner off the highway. He was older, weary, but determined. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were contracts, invoices, and even a handwritten note from Richard, admitting to cooking the books. "This is the nail in his coffin," the man said. "But I couldn't fight him alone. Too much money, too many lawyers. But you've already cracked his image. Maybe now people will listen." I felt a surge of hope. For the first time, we had something bigger than family gossip. We had proof the law would recognize. But we had to be careful. Richard was already circling like a wounded wolf. If he caught wind of this before we were ready, he'd bury it. So we made a plan. Emily and I would quietly gather more evidence: old employees, business partners, anyone with a grudge and a paper trail. Dad would focus on staying steady, not letting Richard's smear campaign get to him. And Mom? She prayed every night that the truth would finally win. But Richard wasn't idle. He started showing up at people's houses, knocking on doors with that fake charming smile, saying things like, "Don't believe the lies. They're jealous of me. Look at all I've done for you." Some fell for it. Others slammed the door. The family split deeper than ever. Barbecues turned into shouting matches. Weddings were tense, with cousins whispering behind napkins. And then came the phone call that shook me to my core. It was late, maybe 11 p.m. My phone buzzed, and when I answered, it was Richard. His voice was low, almost a growl. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said. "You think you're clever, digging through my past. But listen carefully. If you don't drop this, if you don't shut your mouth, I'll ruin you. I'll ruin your father. I'll make sure your kid grows up ashamed of your name." My blood went cold. "Are you threatening me?" He chuckled darkly. "I don't make threats. I make promises." Then he hung up. I sat there shaking, the phone slipping from my hand. My wife came running, asking what was wrong. I told her, and she hugged me tight. "He's scared," she whispered. "That's why he's lashing out. But scared men are dangerous." The next day, I told Dad about the call. He clenched his fists, his face pale. "That man has taken everything from us. Our mother, our family, our peace. But he will not take our dignity. Not anymore." It was then I realized, this wasn't just about exposing him. It was about survival. About making sure he couldn't destroy us before we destroyed his lies. And just when I thought we were getting the upper hand, the hammer dropped. Richard's lawyers filed for an emergency hearing. They wanted a judge to silence us, make it illegal to talk about him publicly until the lawsuit was resolved. If the judge sided with him, we'd be gagged. Powerless. The hearing was set for 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to prove to the court that Richard wasn't the victim, he was the predator. We gathered everything. The letters, the contracts, the testimonies. Emily worked nights scanning documents. I interviewed old employees. Dad wrote down every memory of Richard manipulating Grandma. We were exhausted, but united. And then, the night before the hearing, I got another phone call. This time, it wasn't Richard. It was my cousin Mark. The one who had stopped talking to me. His voice was shaky. "I need to tell you something. Richard offered me money to testify against you. He wants me to say you forged the documents. But I can't do it. Not after what I've seen." I swallowed hard. "Mark, if you come forward, if you testify for us instead, it could change everything." He hesitated. "I don't know. He's family. But so are you." The line went dead. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering, would Mark stand with us? Or would he let the legend live another day? The next morning, we walked into that courthouse, nerves raw, hearts pounding. Richard was there in his perfect suit, smiling like he already owned the room. And that's when the battle truly began. Walking into that courthouse felt like walking into enemy territory. The air was cold, the walls echoing with the shuffle of papers and the footsteps of strangers. My dad walked beside me, his shoulders tense, his jaw set. Emily carried the thick binder of evidence like it was a shield. And I was terrified. Across the room, there he was. Uncle Richard. Perfect suit. Polished shoes. That same smug grin that had fooled our family for decades. He looked untouchable, like the king of the room. He glanced at me, then leaned over to whisper something to his lawyer, both of them chuckling under their breath. I clenched my fists. Not this time. He's not walking away this time. The judge entered, everyone stood, and the hearing began. Richard's lawyer was slick, the kind of man who smiled while stabbing you in the back. He painted a picture of my dad and me as bitter failures, jealous of Richard's success. He said we had embarked on a smear campaign, fabricating documents and spreading lies to destroy a good man's reputation. When he said, "Good man," I almost laughed out loud. But I stayed quiet. Then it was our turn. Our lawyer, a plain-spoken woman named Mrs. Carter, stood tall and calm. Your Honor, this is not a smear campaign. This is a case of truth finally coming to light. My clients have brought substantial evidence that Mr. Richard manipulated his family, defrauded his mother, and engaged in business practices that harmed others. Today, we will prove that. The judge nodded, expression unreadable. Proceed. And so it began. First, we presented Grandma's letters, the ones where Richard pressured her to change her will. I read them aloud, my voice trembling. You must leave the house to me, or the family name will die. Your other children cannot be trusted. The courtroom went silent. Richard shifted in his seat, his smile cracking. Then Emily showed the military records. Contrary to his claims of honorable service, Richard was dishonorably discharged. She handed the papers to the judge. The lawyer objected, called it irrelevant, but the judge overruled. The truth mattered here. Finally, we brought in the surprise witness, Mark. My cousin. When he walked in, Richard's face drained of color. He hadn't expected this. Mark cleared his throat, nervous. Uncle Richard offered me money to testify against my own family. To say they forged documents. I couldn't do it. Because I've seen enough. I know they're telling the truth. The room erupted. Murmurs everywhere. Richard slammed his hand on the table. Lies. He's lying. The judge banged the gavel. Order. Then Richard's lawyer tried to fight back. He called me to the stand, grilled me with questions meant to twist my words. Isn't it true you've always been jealous of your uncle's success? I looked him straight in the eye. No. I was proud of him. Until I learned he built that success on lies. Isn't it true you resented the inheritance going to him? Of course I resented it. Not because it went to him, but because he manipulated our grandmother to get it. He smirked. So this is about money. I shook my head. No. It's about respect. Respect for a woman who deserved honesty from her son. For the first time, I saw the judge lean forward, his eyes narrowing at Richard. Then came the biggest moment of all. Mrs. Carter called the old business partner, the one with the folder of contracts and invoices. He testified under oath that Richard had cheated him, forged numbers, and left him bankrupt. He showed the handwritten note where Richard admitted to adjusting the books. Richard tried to interrupt, shouting, "That's fake. It's all fake." But the judge silenced him. By the end of the day, the so-called legend looked small. His face was red, his suit rumpled, his hands shaking. And then the judge spoke. "Mr. Richard," he said, his voice stern, "what I see here is not a victim of defamation, but a man who has built a life on deception. The evidence presented is credible and consistent. This court will not grant your request for an injunction. Furthermore, I am recommending that these documents be forwarded for criminal review." My dad squeezed my shoulder. Emily covered her mouth in shock. Richard's lawyer tried to argue, but the judge banged the gavel. "This hearing is over. It was done. We walked out of that courthouse into the blazing afternoon sun, feeling like we could finally breathe again. Dad lit a cigarette, his hands trembling, tears in his eyes. "We did it," he whispered. "After all these years, we finally did it." But as we celebrated, Richard stormed past us, his face twisted with rage. He leaned close, his voice a hiss. "This isn't over," he spat. "You've made powerful enemies today. You'll regret it." And just like that, he was gone, striding down the courthouse steps like a fallen king. For the next few days, the family was in chaos. Some called us heroes, thanking us for exposing the truth. Others accused us of destroying the family, saying we should have kept quiet. The split was deeper than ever. But one thing was certain, the legend was dead. Or so we thought. Because Richard wasn't done fighting. And what he did next shocked us all. After the courtroom showdown, we thought it was over. The judge had dismissed his lawsuit, the evidence was strong, and for the first time in years, my father slept through the night. I remember him sitting on the porch, sipping coffee, and saying, "Maybe now we can finally live in peace." But peace doesn't come easy when a man like Richard is cornered. He had lost the battle in court, but he wasn't done. He still had influence, still had loyal followers in the family, and he was determined to claw his way back. Within weeks, rumors spread again. He told people the judge was biased, that we had planted fake witnesses. He claimed we were bankrupt and desperate, feeding on his success. At first, some believed him. After all, it was easier to cling to the legend than to accept they had worshipped a fraud. But then karma, slow and steady, started knocking on his door. The state opened an investigation into his business. Old partners came forward, emboldened by the court ruling. One by one, they spoke about unpaid debts, shady contracts, and broken promises. The image of the powerful businessman crumbled. Then the bank came for his mansion. The gleaming house he had paraded in front of us for decades went into foreclosure. Neighbors whispered as movers carried out expensive furniture. The legend's castle was nothing more than a shell built on credit. I'll never forget the day I drove past that house. The lawn was overgrown, the windows dark. A "for sale" sign stood in the yard. And there, sitting on the front steps with his head in his hands, was Richard. No suit. No smile. Just a broken man. Part of me wanted to stop, to tell him it didn't have to end this way. But then I remembered my grandmother's tears when she had told my dad she hoped she hadn't made a mistake with the will. I remembered the way Richard had threatened me over the phone, promising to ruin us. I remembered the years of shadows, lies, and manipulation. So I drove on. It didn't end there. The truth spread through the family, slow but unstoppable. Cousins who once defended him started apologizing. My aunt, who had stood by him for years, finally admitted through tears that she had been afraid to lose his financial help. "I wanted to believe in him," she said. "But now I see who he really was." Even his closest allies abandoned him when the money dried up. Because that's the thing about men who build their lives on lies and wealth, they only keep loyalty as long as the gifts keep flowing. Months later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Richard. Just a single page, handwritten. "You've destroyed me," it read. "Are you proud of yourself? You'll never be remembered as I was." I stared at it for a long time. The irony hit me hard. Remembered as he was? A liar? A thief? A fraud? No thank you. I didn't respond. Some battles aren't worth continuing once they're already won. But my father, he did something I didn't expect. He wrote back. His letter was simple. "You destroyed yourself, Richard. We only showed people the truth." Not long after, we heard Richard had left town. No one knew exactly where. Some said he moved to a cheap apartment in another state. Others claimed he was staying with a distant friend, still trying to spin his old tales. But in our town, his legend was gone. The myth had finally died. And in its place, something else grew. At the next family reunion, there was no fancy car pulling up, no polished speech about pride and legacy. Instead, we gathered around a picnic table, sharing stories about Grandma. Real stories. How she laughed when she burned pies, how she sewed quilts for every grandchild, how she sat on her porch humming hymns. For the first time, we celebrated her, not him. Dad raised a glass. His hands were steady now. "To Mom," he said. the real heart of this family. We all clinked our cups, tears in our eyes. And I realized, the legend was never Richard. It was Grandma. It was the quiet dignity of honesty, the strength of love, the kind of legacy money can't buy. That night, as I watched my cousins laugh together again, I felt peace. The shadow was gone. The truth had set us free. And the moral? Legends built on lies always fall. But the truth, the real truth, outlasts them all.